Some incredible games get forgotten, not because they're bad, but because they never got the attention they deserved. So here are 15 underrated games you absolutely need to play. A Plague Tale Requiem is the kind of game that can make you forget you're playing a video game. You're thrown back into Amicia and Hugo's brutal journey, where every beautiful location hides something terrifying. And the rats are still the star of the show, except this time, there are hundreds of thousands of them flooding through entire environments. But what really makes Requiem work is the relationship between Amicia and Hugo. You're constantly trying to protect him while watching their situation become more and more desperate. The stealth isn't perfect, and some sections can drag, but when the game wants to go big, it goes absolutely insane. It's a gorgeous, emotional, and genuinely disturbing adventure that somehow never became nearly as mainstream as it deserved to be.
You must protect him, Amicia.
Remember the Mad Max game? Probably not. And that's exactly why it's on this list. It came out in 2015, right around Fury Road, but somehow got completely buried. And to make things worse, it launched on the exact same day as Metal Gear Solid 5. But underneath all that is a surprisingly fun open-world game. And the best part isn't even the wasteland, it's the car. You start with basically nothing and build the magnum opus from the ground up, turning a pile of scrap into an absolute war machine. You're chasing convoys, ripping weapons off enemy vehicles with a harpoon, smashing cars apart, and constantly upgrading your ride. The story can get repetitive, but when you're flying across the desert, spot a convoy in the distance, and decide to go after it, you realize just how badly this game was overlooked.
My name is Max.
Everyone remembers Watch Dogs. Almost nobody talks about Watch Dogs 2. And that's weird, because Ubisoft basically took everything people complained about in the first game and built a much more fun experience around it. Instead of playing as a miserable guy in a gray Chicago, you're Marcus Holloway, running around San Francisco with a crew of hackers, drones, RC cars, and an absurd amount of freedom. And the best part is that hacking isn't just a gimmick. You can manipulate traffic, hijack cameras, control machines, distract enemies, or just cause complete chaos without firing a shot. The story is lighter, the world is more colorful, and the gameplay gives you far more freedom to approach missions your own way. Watch Dogs 2 isn't some forgotten masterpiece, but it is absolutely one of those games people remember far less fondly than they should. The first Evil Within had some great ideas, but the sequel is where the series really started to click. You play as Sebastian Castellanos, who willingly enters a nightmare world called Union to save his daughter. And unlike the first game, you're not constantly being pushed down one narrow corridor. Some areas open up into surprisingly large spaces where you can explore, sneak around enemies, set traps, scavenge resources, or just run for your life. That freedom makes the horror much more unpredictable. One minute you're quietly searching an abandoned building, and the next, something is chasing you through the darkness. It's not perfect, but the combination of survival horror, exploration, and a surprisingly emotional story makes The Evil Within 2 one of those sequels that deserved way more attention than it got. Everyone knows Ghost of Tsushima, but there's another open-world samurai game that arrived years later and barely got the same attention. Rise of the Ronin comes from Team Ninja, the studio behind Nioh, and it puts you in 19th century Japan during one of the country's biggest periods of change. And the combat is where this game really shines. It's fast, technical, and brutally satisfying, with different styles and weapons that actually make you think about how you're approaching a fight. Then you have the open world, historical characters, choices that can change parts of the story, and huge battles happening around you. It doesn't have Tsushima's visual polish or storytelling, but if what you loved about Tsushima was the feeling of being a samurai, Rise of the Ronin deserves a serious look.
Your time has come.
Rockstar made a game where shooting people isn't even the main attraction. L.A. Noire drops you into a beautifully recreated 1940s Los Angeles and puts you in the shoes of a detective investigating murders, interrogating suspects, and trying to figure out who's lying to your face. And that's what made it so different. You're not just following objective markers, you're actually studying people's expressions, looking for contradictions, searching crime scenes, and deciding whether someone is telling the truth. The facial technology was incredibly ambitious for its time, and even today, the interrogations give the game a personality almost nothing else has. It has flaws, especially with its open world, but there's still nothing quite like walking into a crime scene, finding the evidence, and then sitting across from a suspect, wondering whether you've caught them in a lie.
Get yourself 2 suits, get them pressed. You'll be needing.
After Marvel's Avengers, almost nobody expected another Marvel game to come along and actually nail the single-player experience. But Guardians of the Galaxy did. You play as Star-Lord, but the real strength is the entire team. Rocket, Groot, Gamora, and Drax constantly argue, joke around, and react to whatever you're doing, which makes the Guardians feel like an actual dysfunctional family. Combat is fun, but honestly, the characters are the reason to play it. Every conversation feels like you're hanging out with this ridiculous group of people, and the soundtrack only makes the whole thing better. It also tells a complete story without trying to turn the game into a live service machine. For a game based on one of the biggest franchises in the world, it's surprisingly easy to forget it even exists, and that's exactly why it belongs here.
No! We disrobe!
Keep your pants on.
Although it could be used as a distraction.
If you've ever watched Avatar and thought, I wish I could actually live on Pandora, this is probably the closest gaming gets. Frontiers of Pandora gives you a massive version of that world, and honestly, the environment is the star. You can run through enormous forests, climb cliffs, glide across the landscape, and eventually, fly around Pandora on your own Banshee. Combat is more interesting than you'd expect, too. You're not just running into enemy bases with a machine gun. You can use bows, stealth, movement, and the environment to take down the RDA. The story isn't going to reinvent open-world games, and some of the Ubisoft formula is still obvious. But when you stop following the objective and just start exploring Pandora, the game suddenly makes sense. It might be one of the prettiest open worlds that far fewer people actually played. The exploration, movement, and Pandora itself were among the game's strongest aspects, even in contemporary reviews.
I am Navi.
Rockstar made one of the most brutally cinematic shooters ever, and somehow, Max Payne 3 doesn't get talked about nearly enough anymore. Max is older, broken, and far away from the snowy streets of New York, now working security in Brazil. But the second a firefight starts, the game becomes pure chaos. Bullet time is still the star. You can dive through the air, slow everything down, and watch bullets rip through the environment as you pick enemies apart. And the gunplay still feels ridiculously good. Every shot has weight. Every kill has impact, and the game constantly throws these insane set pieces at you. It's also much more linear than a modern Rockstar game, which is probably part of why people forget about it. But if you want a game that feels like playing through an absurdly violent action movie, Max Payne 3 still delivers. The game's bullet time gunplay, environmental destruction, and cinematic action remain some of its most praised features. Rockstar had GTA. Ubisoft had Assassin's Creed. And somehow, Sleeping Dogs never became the massive franchise it deserves to be. You play as Wei Shen, an undercover cop infiltrating the Hong Kong triads, and the setting gives the game an identity almost no other open-world crime game has. The drive and shooting are good, but the martial arts are what make it special. Fights feel closer to a Hong Kong action movie than a traditional open-world brawler, with counters, environmental takedowns, and brutal combos. And then, the story starts blurring the line between Wei's real life and the criminal world he's infiltrating. It's not as big as GTA, and it doesn't have Rockstar's polish, but that's almost beside the point. Sleeping Dogs has its own personality, and years later, it's still one of those games where you wonder why we never got a proper sequel.
We're cops. There are rules.
You're a cop. I am an undercover cop. The rules of...
Titanfall 2 had one of the best FPS campaigns of its generation, and almost nobody was ready for it. You play as Jack Cooper, a soldier who gets paired with a Titan called BT, and what starts as a straightforward military shooter quickly turns into one of the most creative campaigns in the genre. You've got wall running, giant robots, ridiculous set pieces, and one mission in particular that completely changes how you move through time and space. And the relationship between Cooper and BT is what makes the whole thing work. Somehow, a giant machine ends up being one of the most memorable characters in the game. The biggest problem wasn't the game itself. It launched between Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, which gave it almost no room to breathe. If you've never played Titanfall 2's campaign, you're missing one of the easiest recommendations on this entire list.
Protocol 2. Uphold the mission. Protocol 3.
Returnal is one of those games that makes you wonder why Sony didn't make 10 more games like it. You crash onto an alien planet as Selene, and every time you die, you wake up at the beginning again. But the world, enemies, and weapons keep changing. That sounds frustrating until you actually play it. The combat is insanely fast. You're dashing through bullet hell patterns, jumping over lasers, switching weapons, and trying to survive waves of enemies that fill the entire screen. And because every run is different, even a failed attempt can teach you something that makes the next one better. Then, there's the mystery surrounding Selene and the planet, which slowly gives the whole experience a much darker side. It's brutally difficult, and definitely not for everyone, but Returnal feels like one of the most unique AAA games of the PS5 generation, and far fewer people experienced it than they should have.
Over and over, I relive my first moments on this alien planet.
Prey is the kind of game where the less you know before playing it, the better. You're trapped aboard a massive space station called Talos 1. Something has gone horribly wrong, and suddenly, even the coffee cup on your desk might be trying to kill you. The mimics can disguise themselves as everyday objects, but that's just the beginning. You can approach problems through stealth, hacking, combat, exploration, or abilities that completely change how you interact with the station. And Talos 1 feels like a real place. You can look through windows and see areas you haven't reached yet, find alternate routes, discover hidden rooms, and slowly piece together what happened. It's not the easiest game to explain without spoiling it, which is probably part of the reason it never became a massive hit. But if you love games that reward curiosity and actually let you solve problems your own way, Prey is an absolute must-play.
I'm just staring into the black between the stars. There's something there. I know there is.
A game about Pinocchio had absolutely no business being this good. Lies of P takes the basic idea of Pinocchio and turns it into a dark, brutal Souls-like set in the ruined city of Krat, where puppets have gone completely insane. And somehow, it works. The combat feels heavy and deliberate, with perfect guards, dodges, weapon combinations, and some genuinely brutal boss fights. But what makes it stand out is the atmosphere. Krat looks incredible, the mechanical puppets are unsettling, and the whole world feels like a twisted version of a classic fairy tale. It definitely wears its Bloodborne and Souls influences on its sleeve, but it doesn't feel like a cheap copy. It takes familiar ideas, gives them its own identity, and then backs them up with some seriously satisfying combat.
You got a lot to answer for!
Days Gone might be the biggest example of a game that got judged before people really understood what it was. You play as Deacon St. John, riding through a post-apocalyptic Oregon, where the world is filled with freakers, survivors, and massive hordes that can turn a quiet road into absolute chaos. And the motorcycle is a huge part of why the game works. It's your transport, your escape route, and basically your lifeline. You have to fuel it, upgrade it, and learn the world around it. But then, you encounter a horde. Hundreds of freakers moving together, chasing you through the environment, climbing over each other just to get to you. The game launched with plenty of criticism, but over time, more players started appreciating its world, characters, and sheer scale. And looking back now, it's hard not to wonder what this franchise could have become if it had been given another chance. Days Gone has had a notably stronger long-term player reception than its initial critical response, with Metacritic currently showing a generally favorable 8.5 user score.
Gotta ask you something. What does it matter if everyone else is dead?
Sometimes, the best games aren't the ones everyone talks about. They're the ones you discover years later and wonder how you ever missed them. If you found a game you want to play, drop a like and subscribe for more. And let me know which underrated game we missed.